Welcome back to the deep dive. Our goal here is always to cut through the noise, look closely at some compelling sources, and really pull out those key insights, give you that shortcut to being genuinely informed.
And today, we're diving into something, well, something pretty unique and definitely challenging.
Yeah, we're moving way beyond the usual headlines, the policy debates you hear all the time.
We are. We're looking at this really fascinating text, one that puts forward a pretty radical idea
Which is?
that some of the biggest issues facing America, gun violence, abortion, the addiction crisis, sexual violence, that these aren't just separate problems we can tackle one by one with new laws.
Okay, so not isolated crises. Then what are they, according to this source?
The source argues they're much more. They're reflections, deep reflections of something happening within the American soul itself.
Wow, okay. That's a heavy starting point.
It is. And the core idea, the real provocation right at the start, is stated so clearly. This is not a crisis. It's a mirror.
It's a mirror that immediately stops you, doesn't it?
It really does. It forces you to think, okay, what if these huge, painful problems aren't just things out there to be fixed by politics or courts?
But symptoms. Symptoms of something inside.
Exactly. Symptoms of what the source calls, very bravely, a soul-starved society.
A soul-starved society. What does that even mean practically? Is it like a lack of meaning? Emptiness?
I think it's suggesting all of that, yeah. A kind of fundamental hunger that isn't being met despite, all the material wealth. A void.
And if it's a mirror, what's it showing us? Something we don't want to see.
Probably. Things we maybe deny or ignore. And the source doesn't just state this abstractly. It immediately backs it up with some really sobering numbers just to set the stage.
Okay, let's hear them. Though I have a feeling they won't be easy.
They're not. So in 2023 alone, over 105,000 Americans died from drug overdoses.
105,000. Just staggering.
It is, and often just a statistic we glance past. Then more than 16,000 murders, most committed with firearms.
Right.
And then there's the quieter numbers. Nearly 1 million pregnancies terminated before birth.
1 million.
Almost. And alongside that, an uncounted number of sexual assaults. We know it's vast, mostly women, mostly by people they know, and mostly unreported.
So these numbers, they aren't just data points for policymakers. The source is saying they're the reflection, the story.
Exactly, the raw, painful story. And it leads directly to the core question the text poses, very directly. What kind of soul creates this pattern of harm?
Ooh. Okay, so this deep dive, it isn't about finding who to blame.
No, not at all. The mission here, following the source, is really just to hold up that mirror, as uncomfortable as it might be.
To try and understand what's been lost.
Yeah. What has been lost, the source asks, that death now feels like relief? Why are so many people drawn to the edge?
And this idea that these crises might actually be prayers. What does that mean?
It's a radical thought, isn't it? But deeply compassionate. Maybe these outward signs of crisis are actually desperate, unconscious pleas for something deeper, something meaningful, something holy even.
Okay, a difficult conversation, but maybe a vital one. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So the source really pushes back against our usual ways of thinking, right? It says the answers aren't in politics, courtrooms, campaign slogans.
Right off the bat, yeah. It basically says our standard toolkit is missing the point, fundamentally.
So if not there, where do we look, according to this text?
It points inward and also outward, but differently. It says the answer is found in our rituals, our daily choices, our aching silence.
Rituals, choices, silence. Okay, break that down. Rituals aren't just church services, presumably.
No, I think it means more like our ingrained habits, how we cope, how we escape, how we interact or fail to interact, our patterns.
And daily choices, the small things that add up.
Exactly. The cumulative weight of millions of individual decisions, maybe made without much thought, and that aching silence. That sounds like unspoken grief, doesn't it? Trauma we don't address.
Yeah, the things we don't talk about that just fester. It's about the unseen stuff.
Deeply ingrained behaviors, unspoken truths. Yeah.
And the language it uses to describe the nation, it's stark. Marinated in despair, dressing its wounds with denial, and calling the bloodstains culture.
That phrase, calling the bloodstains culture, wow.
It's visceral.
Wow.
What does that imply? That we just accept this level of suffering, normalize it?
I think so. A kind of collective numbness or maybe a deliberate rebranding of pain as just how things are. The bloodstains, I think it means both literal violence and, the metaphorical stains of trauma.
And we call it culture.
Shrug it off. That seems to be the critique, a profound denial. And it connects each specific crisis to this deeper malaise. It's not just cause and effect.
Okay, like how? Give me an example.
Well, take gun violence. The source says it's not just about crime. It's about control in a society that feels powerless.
So the gun becomes a symbol, a desperate grasp for agency when everything else feels out of control.
Precisely. It reframes the act itself. It's not just bad guy does bad thing.
Okay, and abortion, how does that fit?
It says it's not just about rights, but it's about resignation in a world that doesn't nurture.
Resignation, that's different. It implies giving up, not just choosing freely. A systemic failure.
Yeah, a surrender to overwhelming circumstances because the support isn't there. It's a critique of the societal context, not just the individual choice.
And the opioid crisis,
Yeah.
the overdoses.
Again, moving beyond just chemical accident or bad choices, the source calls it the soft scream of millions trying to leave a world that forgot how to love.
A soft scream, trying to leave. That frames addiction as an escape from unbearable pain, from a lack of connection.
A deep existential cry, yeah. A world so lacking in love or meaning that checking out feels like the only option.
And sexual violence.
This one is really unsettling. It says it's not only about predators, but about the slow death of intimacy in a culture that teaches us to dominate rather than feel.
The slow death of intimacy. So it's not just individual acts, but a cultural breakdown in how we relate. Power over connection.
Exactly. A societal value system that prioritizes conquest over empathy, domination over feeling.
So if you weave all these threads together, what's the overall picture?
The source argues we're seeing not the failure of a nation's laws, but the unraveling of its meaning.
The unraveling of meaning. That's huge. What specific meaning are we losing? Like a shared purpose? Or something more personal?
I think it implies both. A loss of a collective story, maybe? A common ground about what matters, what holds us together? The source is pretty clear. The core diagnosis is this. America is dying from a lack of reverence.
Reverence. Like respect, but deeper.
Yeah, like awe. Sacredness, reverence for life, for the body, for connection, for mystery.
Okay, I can see how that connects. Lack of reverence for life maybe leads to violence. Lack of reverence for the body maybe leads to violation or escape through drugs.
Lack of reverence for connection leads to isolation. For mystery, maybe leads to a purely materialistic, meaningless existence.
So it's hitting at something really fundamental. A spiritual emptiness. A soul starvation at the root of it all.
That's the core argument. And it sets the stage perfectly for looking closer at each crisis, starting with guns.
Right. And the source's take on guns is, well, it's intense. It calls the gun not just a tool. It is a symbol, an idol, a personal theology.
An idol, a personal theology. That's not language we usually hear in policy debates.
So kidding. What does that imply? That the gun offers something transcendent, beyond just protection.
I think so. It becomes almost a sacred object. The source says it's what we reach for when words fail, when fear rises, when meaning disappears.
So it's a last resort, when everything else feels empty or powerless.
Yeah, it offers this illusion of ultimate control. The source even calls it, chillingly, a prayer whispered through cold steel.
A prayer whispered through cold steel. Wow. A prayer for what? Significance, control, an end to pain.
Maybe all of the above. A desperate plea when you feel completely lost or unheard.
And it's not just a private thing, is it? The source talks about how we exalt them.
Right. Publicly. Bumper stickers, Christmas cards with guns, toddlers holding them in photos. It's normalized, almost sanctified.
The slogans, too. God, guns, and country. Come and take it.
Yeah. It paints this picture of the gun as the last remaining source of agency in a culture where trust in institutions, in leaders, maybe even in each other, has eroded.
So when everything else feels broken, the gun offers this tangible power.
Exactly. And the source makes this really startling claim. It is not protection. It is salvation through violence.
Salvation through violence. That's a terrifying inversion.
It is. It suggests a destructive path to what feels like deliverance. And the source asks, what's the cost of worshiping this idol? It says its temple is soaked in blood.
And this is where the statistics come back in, but with a twist, right? It's not just about homicides.
Exactly. While, yes, thousands of murders involved firearms, the source highlights the hidden epidemic. The majority of gun deaths in America are suicides.
Tens of thousands every year.
Tens of thousands. People aiming the gun not outward, but inward. The insight is profound. The bullet is not always aimed at another. Often it is aimed at the void within.
Aimed at the void within. So it forces us to look at the internal pain, the despair, not just the external violence.
Absolutely. It connects the gun directly to that inner state, especially in a society where, as the source puts it, power is sold like fast food. Instant, disposable, isolating.
And the gun offers this illusion of strength, precisely when people feel most alone.
Yeah. As loneliness peaks, purpose fades, and connection dissolves. When meaning evaporates, the gun provides this dark form of agency. It turns existential agony into a decision.
A way to feel something.
Yeah.
Or make sure someone else feels it. That's dark.
Deeply dark. It connects that internal agony to the external act, often violently.
And mass shootings, how does the source frame those? Not just random.
No, it calls them the ritual culmination of what happens when pain festers in silence.
A ritual culmination. Wow.
And it specifically points to the emptiness, especially among young men, taught that to feel is to be weak and to control is to be worthy.
That's a direct hit on cultural conditioning around masculinity, isn't it? Discouraging emotion, valuing stoicism.
And suggesting that can lead here. If feeling is weakness and control is worthiness, what's left?
And the source talks about how guns are sanctified everywhere. Politicians posing with them, pastors blessing them.
Children walking through metal detectors at school, becoming normal.
It asks, what does it say about a nation that prepares its students more for bullets than for belonging?
Oof, that hits hard. It suggests the root issue is this spiritual wound.
Where trust is gone, communities eroded.
And the myth of the lone hero with a gun replaces the reality of maybe just a broken person with no one to turn to.
So when we confuse firepower with freedom,
Yeah.
what's the ultimate cost?
The source says the blood keeps pouring until we ask why we cling to the myth, why we ignore the spiritual wound.
And that underlying question, that unanswered prayer behind the gun, do I matter?
Yeah, a desperate plea for significance, for existence that gets twisted into violence.
Such a powerful, disturbing diagnosis. Okay, let's shift gears from that violence to abortion.
Right. And again, the source pushes us past the usual legal and moral debates. It wants us to look at the societal context, what it calls reproductive despair.
Reproductive despair. Not just choice, but the conditions around the choice.
Exactly. Shifting the focus.
And the numbers here are, frankly, hard to comprehend. 943,000 abortions in the U.S. in 2023.
Almost 1 million. The source translates that. Nearly 1 in every 351 Americans is aborted before birth.
1 in 351. It's almost unimaginable.
And to really make us feel the weight of that number, the source does this stark comparison.
Right, comparing it to other causes of death.
Yeah. So those 943,000 abortions, compare that to gun deaths, around 16,000, drug overdoses, 105,000, suicides, 49,000, car crashes, 40,000, even murder by firearm, about 5,000.
So abortions vastly outnumber all of those combined.
By a huge margin. And then the source goes further. More than cancer, more than heart disease, more than COVID, more than war, terrorism, and natural disasters combined.
More than all of that.
That's the claim. And yet it happens quietly, legally, efficiently. The source asks, what does it mean when a society absorbs that level of loss so quietly? It says, we rarely say their names because they never had names.
That silence, it feels connected to the earlier point about aching silence. Or are we just uncomfortable acknowledging this scale of loss?
It seems so. And the source directly challenges the idea that this is about apathy. It argues behind nearly every abortion is not apathy, it is anguish.
Anguish.
Driven by what?
It lists them. Poverty, abandonment, violence, fear, hopelessness. It paints a picture of overwhelming, crushing circumstances.
So it moves it away from a simple political debate into this space of deep societal failure.
Exactly. And in that context, the source uses this devastating phrase, the womb isn't a sanctuary, becomes a site of collapse.
Collapse.
Yeah.
Economic, emotional, spiritual.
All of it. The burden of creating life in a society that, as the source puts it, will not help you raise it.
Yeah.
It's a direct indictment of the lack of support systems.
And this connects to that critique. America doesn't cradle life, it prices it.
Yeah. It gives concrete examples. Maternity leave is a myth, often inadequate or non-existent. Childcare is unaffordable. Single parenthood is vilified. And children themselves measured not in sacredness, but in cost. That's brutal.
It is. It suggests this economic logic permeates everything, turning life into a calculation.
So in that light, abortion isn't framed as empowerment, but as
As a quiet retreat, A survival tactic, even a white flag waved in the war against crushing isolation and relentless scarcity.
A white flag chosen out of desperation.
That's the implication. Chosen not because the pregnant person hates life, but because no one is helping them live it. It's presented as an act of survival in an unsupportive world.
So what kind of society forces people into that position, the source calls it?
Not a political crisis. It has a soul crisis. A culture where life isn't revered, but maybe even feared, where the prospect of bringing life in feels terrifying.
And that final line, it just reframes everything, takes it out of debate and into grief.
It is not a debate, it is a funeral.
Yeah, that stays with you. Okay,
Yeah.
From that quiet surrender, let's turn to addiction. The silent scream, as the source puts it.
Right, and the assessment here is grim from the start. The opioid crisis.
Yeah.
No longer a crisis. It is a norm, a backdrop, a recurring funeral with no eulogy.
No eulogy, just normalized tragedy.
Woven into the background noise of our lives.
And the numbers again,
Yeah.
just hammering home the scale.
Oh.
Over 105,000 overdose deaths in 2023.
And that comparison again. More than all U.S. gun homicides, suicides, and vehicular deaths combined.
One death every 5 minutes,
Yeah.
all day, every day.
Let that sink in every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And yet, where's the sustained national mourning? The flags at half-mast.
The source says we don't mourn because we don't know what to do with pain that doesn't make headlines. It's unmourned, compartmentalized.
Exactly, a quiet devastation. And the core argument is this isn't just about fentanyl or pills.
It's deeper. It's about grief.
Yeah, grief, unprocessed, unseen, and chemically contained. The drugs are the container, the escape vehicle.
Millions trying to exit their bodies because the world inside and out is unbearable.
That's the idea. A spiritual and emotional flight from reality, not just a physical addiction, a desperate attempt to numb unbearable pain.
So how did we get here? What allows that level of despair to take hold?
The source points to a breakdown, a spiritual epidemic of disconnection. Fundamental structures collapsing.
Like what?
Community has collapsed into consumption. Shared bonds replaced by shopping. Religion has collapsed into ritual. Empty practices, maybe, instead of real connection.
Family has collapsed into survival. Strained by pressure, just getting by.
And the punchline. And where connection used to live, addiction has moved in, filling that vacuum.
Wow, that paints a bleak picture of societal erosion leaving space for addiction.
And the stats back it up. 54 million Americans needed treatment for substance use in 2023. That's huge.
And 1 in 6 adults.
Roughly, but fewer than 1 in 4 got help, a massive treatment gap.
And the highest death rate is among 35 to 44-year-olds, a generation really struggling.
Deeply. And with fentanyl driving over 70% of deaths, the source is blunt. This is not experimentation. This is mass despair.
Mass despair, not just individual choices gone wrong.
No. And it pushes back against stereotypes, too. Addiction isn't always glamorous or criminal.
It gives those examples. The mother using painkillers for her double shift.
The lonely teenager vaping.
The father alone in a motel with meth, trying to silence the voices. Or maybe just the silence itself.
Yeah. They're not immoral, the source insists. They are turning to drugs because they are invisible.
Invisible. Their pain isn't seen or acknowledged.
So pain becomes this private language, no community ways to heal, only algorithms for avoidance.
And addiction is the end result. The numbness.
The final coping mechanism of a society that no longer knows how to hold itself, a collective failure to deal with pain.
So until we see it not as personal failure, but collective abandonment.
The body count keeps rising. Quietly, efficiently, uninterrupted.
And that final image. No one will hear the needle drop. Chilling. The silence again.
Devastatingly silent. And that silence leads us right into the next area. Sexual violence. Where the source says, not every wound bleeds. Not every death is recorded.
It happens in hidden corners. Doesn't always leave bruises, but always leaves something broken inside.
Exactly. An invisible wound often carried in silence.
And the source argues that the true measure isn't the reported crimes, it's the silence itself. That statistic. 1 in 6 women in America are survivors of rape.
1 in 6. And the details are crucial. Most knew their attacker. Most never reported it. Most were never believed.
So it's not just a justice system failure, it's societal. Disbelief, silencing.
Profoundly. The source says, unlike gun violence or drug overdoses, sexual violence is not counted by the body. It's counted by the silence.
And the silence is everywhere. In the jokes, the avoidance.
The way people flinch. Unspoken truths.
Yeah. And the official data, when we do get it, paints a consistent, grim picture.
horrifyingly consistent. It's one of the most underreported crimes. Over half of reported cases involve victims under 18.
Under 18, children.
And nearly 90% of the time, the victim knew the offender, shattering that stranger danger myth.
So the source concludes, this is not random. This is not rare. This is cultural decay woven into our daily fabric.
It implicates all of us, the culture itself, not just individuals.
Which forces that deeply uncomfortable question. What does it say about a society when the body is no longer a sacred boundary, but a target?
And it analyzes why. It points to emotional illiteracy being the norm, people just unable to process or express feelings healthily.
Where domination is taught and vulnerability is mocked, power over empathy.
Where men are told they're owed affection and women they must earn safety. A totally warped view of relationships.
And intimacy gets reduced to performance. Consent to just a checkbox, stripped of genuine connection.
It's a deep critique of how we learn to relate or fail to.
And it connects us back to how we raise kids.
Directly. On a diet of overstimulation and undernourishment. Lots of info, not enough emotional substance.
We teach algebra, but not empathy. We teach obedience, but not boundaries. And then we're surprised by violence.
Exactly. So sexual violence isn't seen as a crime of passion, but a collapse of relationship.
Born from disconnection, entitlement, hunger for control.
Stemming from that ecosystem where no one taught the boy to cry and no one believed the girl who did.
And it challenges the questions we ask, right? The victim-blaming ones.
Powerfully. What was she wearing? Was she drinking? Why didn't she report it? It says those questions shift the blame.
Instead, we should be asking
why he thought he could take what was not his. And crucially, what kind of world makes him believe she is not someone, but something.
Shifting the focus to the perpetrator and the society that shaped him, that's huge.
It defines the act itself as the theft of agency, rewriting someone's story violently, without permission. A deep psychological violation.
And it hammers home. This isn't rare.
It's common, it's everywhere, it's beneath the jokes, it's in the texts left unread, it's in the way we flinch, it's in the silence we keep. Pervasive. Hidden in plain sight.
So, ultimately, sexual violence is presented as a symptom of a society that's
emotionally bankrupt, spiritually malnourished, and relationally starved. A consequence of losing intimacy and respect.
And until we fix that deeper illness, the trauma continues. The bodies will keep piling up, not in graves, but in locked memories.
Those invisible, long-lasting wounds? Yeah.
Okay. So we've looked at gun violence, abortion, addiction, sexual violence, all framed as symptoms. Now let's connect it all to the root cause the source identifies.
Right. It synthesizes everything. These aren't separate issues. They're symptoms of one underlying disease, something older than any policy. It is spiritual, existential, invisible until it erupts in blood.
The invisible root, spiritual, existential. How does it describe this core problem?
It calls America a nation drenched in noise and starving for meaning.
That paradox again. All the noise, information overload, but empty inside.
Exactly. The most connected species in history, yet millions scream into digital voids, hoping someone will see them, touch them, hold them.
And when that deep need for connection, for being seen, isn't met,
that's when, the source argues, the turn to violence happens. Against self, others, the unborn, trying to escape the void. It makes that profound point. Pain, left untransformed, is always transmitted.
If we don't deal with our wounds, they just spread destructively.
So the core diagnosis is repeated. America is dying from disconnection, from the loss of the sacred.
The sacred. What does that mean in practical terms? What's been lost?
Things once found in shared rituals, family bonds, community presence, and reverence for life. Now, the source says, these things have been outsourced, digitized, or monetized.
So instead of community, we have online interactions. Instead of reverence, consumerism.
Pretty much. We no longer worship at temples, we shop at them, seeking fulfillment in stuff. We no longer find God in silence. We drown her in content. Constant stimulation over inner peace.
A spiritual void filled with noise and commerce.
That seems to be the argument. And in that kind of world, the source says, harm becomes inevitable.
Inevitable? Why?
Not because people are monsters, but because people are starved.
Starved. Starved for what?
Starved for affection, for dignity, for awe, for something real. That fundamental soul hunger we talked about.
And when those deep needs go unmet, people act out destructively. Not out of inherent evil, but out of desperation.
That's the reframing. It shifts from blaming individuals to diagnosing a collective starvation.
And it ties each perpetrator or person making a desperate choice back to this.
Explicitly, the shooter taught power is louder than pain. The addict The world's unbearable drugs quiet it. The abortion. Life made unaffordable, unsupported, or unsafe. The rapist, formed in a culture that teaches conquest over compassion.
So seeing the actions as emerging from this starved culture, not just random acts within it.
Exactly. It emphasizes societal complicity, cultural disease, not just individual sin.
It doesn't let us off the hook. It says we built this.
Yeah. With every dollar spent numbing, with every boy told not to cry, with every mother left to raise a child alone, with every teenager scrolling until 3 a.m., desperate for meaning.
We all contribute through our choices, our inaction, the values we uphold, maybe without even realizing it.
It's a call for collective responsibility, and it highlights that paradox of modern life.
We have enough food, but no nourishment. Enough voices, but no truth. Enough gods, but no reverence.
Chilling summary, isn't it? Materially rich, spiritually bankrupt.
So the call to action isn't just policy tweaks, it's deeper.
Much deeper.
Until we address this foundational hunger, the deep human need for belonging, transcendence, and love, we will keep treating symptoms, and the rot will keep blooming.
We have to feed the soul, essentially.
That's the core message, and it reminds us what we are, fundamentally.
We are not machines. We are not algorithms. We are not products or profiles or headlines. We are souls.
A reclamation of our humanity against forces that try to reduce us.
And that final diagnosis, echoing the start.
And America has forgotten hers.
Wow. A stark, almost heartbroken conclusion. America has forgotten its soul. It really makes you pause, doesn't it? That thought lingers. This whole deep dive, looking at the source, it suggests that just recognizing these crises as symptoms, as reflections of that starved soul, is maybe the hardest but most vital first step.
Yeah, moving past the surface noise, the politics, and seeing the interconnected roots in culture, in spirit.
It forces that uncomfortable look in the mirror.
It leaves you, the listener, with that profound question. Okay, if we're soul-starved, what does a truly fed society even look like? How do we start nourishing that?
Individually, collectively. It suggests the path isn't easy or obvious, but maybe it starts small.
With acts of reconnection, empathy, cultivating that reverence the source talks about. For life, for each other.
Perhaps. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We know this was heavy, but we hope it offered not just information, but maybe a new lens, a new perspective. Confronting the shadows, but maybe seeing potential for light too.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep reflecting on what truly nourishes the human spirit.